My name is Francois Rischard. I would have liked to be with you today, but I live very far away, and so you'll have to get by seeing me on a small video. So I asked myself, what will I do in a short video? And I thought the best thing I could do for you is to help you look into the future, let's say into the next 40 or 50 years. And I would say, quoting Dickens, that it will be the best of times and it will be the worst of times. Let me start with why I'm saying it will be the best of times. What you'll have is wonderful new developments, new technologies, new ways of doing things, which will completely change life. First, it will make life longer and healthier. If you look at a 70-year-old today, he looks like a 40-year-old 100 years ago. Very soon there'll be a number of 120-year-olds in any population in the rich countries. By 2060, it would not be surprising if more than 5% of the population in many countries was more than 100 years old. There will be ways to repair your organs, entire organs at one time, through stem cells. Last week there was an announcement in the newspapers here in Europe that Europeans had grown 11 centimeters over the last century. This will happen a little bit everywhere in the world due to much better nutrition practices and so forth. Second, because of electronics, the internet, telecommunications, smartphones and all kinds of other devices, you'll have a life that is more informed and smarter. In a way, today, with a simple smartphone, your brain is connected to millions of other brains. If you look at the internet as a whole, it's no more than 6,000 days old, so it's still a young creature. But it's nearing the size of all the neurons in the brain if you put the whole devices in the world together that deal with internet. You'll be able to access the best teacher in the world from anywhere at any time. Your own teacher will be at best a tutor helping you prepare for the exams, but the best teacher you'll get online. You'll have billions of sensors watching the humidity or the moisture in agricultural fields, your heartbeat, watching traffic and so forth. You'll have objects talking to each other with microchips embedded in them, which includes things like cars driving themselves without a driver very efficiently, much more efficiently, as a matter of fact, than today. Anyway, there'll be lots of things of that kind. The third thing that will happen is you'll have a life that is safer. Poverty today is still 1 billion people in the world that live in extreme poverty, but that number has been coming down really fast. And it wouldn't be surprising if by 2030, as the World Bank now targets, there will be 0 extreme poverty in the world by then. Inequality in the world, for the first time in human history, has, if you calculate it across the whole planet, is coming down. And essentially, you will have more and more ways to track corruption, to detect it, to expose it, to expose abuse of power, to expose other bad practices in government. And so overall, there will be many ways in which life becomes safer. So those are 3 kinds of examples of how life will change in a positive way, looking down 40 or 50 years. So these positive things I just described amount to the reasons why I said that it would be the best of times. But you remember I also said it would be the worst of times. And this will be because there are 4 gigantic shifts that are first time in history shifts that will exercise a lot of stress throughout the planet in the decades to come. The first one is the aging shift. Due to the increase in longevity, which is a good thing, from 45 years on average to 65 or more years on average. Actually in Europe, in Japan, it's 75 to 80 years on average. And due to the fact that women no longer have 5 or 4 children per lifetime, but only 2.2 or something children per lifetime, those 2 things combined mean the world's population is becoming much older. Why is that stressful? Because what it means is that, for instance, in Europe, you had always at least 7 workers per retiree. Now we're down to 4 workers per retiree. Soon enough, it'll be 2 workers per retiree, and by 2030, some European countries may be down to 1 worker per retiree. What that means is that the governments will, which always play a big role in all the rich countries in the pension system, governments will find it very hard to find enough tax money from the workers to finance the pensions of the retirees. And so this will mean huge fiscal deficits, very intractable, massive, causing probably extended debt crisis throughout the world, something that really is not easy to solve. So that's the first momentous shift that will produce stress in the world. The second one has to do with conventional oil depletion. Conventional oil means the sort of oil we got out of the ground in big fields in Saudi Arabia, in Latin America, in the US, where typically you would put 1 barrel in of energy and you would get 20 or 30 barrels out. That form of energy, quite inexpensive, is plateauing right now at about 85 million barrels a day. Maybe it will grow up to 100 million barrels a day. But if you do take into account that the world population of 7 billion people today will go by 2050 to 9 to 10 billion people on the planet, then the stark fact is that somehow the world would have to get by, instead of getting by with 5.5 barrels per year per person as we have it now, we will have to go down by 2050 or 60 to 2.5 barrel per person per year on the planet. Now, humanity has been very smart and good at going from 0 barrels per person per year all the way up to 5.5 barrels per person per year over the last 150 years. And a lot of the growth and success of the world economy has come from that increase. But will the world be wise enough and smart enough to navigate its way down from 5.5 barrels per person per year down to 2.5 barrels per person per year? That is a much trickier thing. And you should expect a lot of stress coming from this first time in history shift, this second first time in history shift. And you should expect also sky-high energy prices as the world struggles with that difficult equation. The third big shift is the shift that comes from the ecological footprint. In 1960, we had 3 billion people on the planet, and we were using roughly half a planet equivalent in terms of the big ecosystems of the world. Now, starting in 1990, we have passed the point of using more than 1 planet equivalent. And that is very bad, because if we use more than 1 planet equivalent, we're actually eating into the regenerative capacity of ecosystems, in other words, the capacity for them to renew themselves and replenish themselves automatically. We are now, instead of going back to 1 planet living as we should have reasonably done, we are now at 1.5 planets per year. That is at 7 billion inhabitants. When we will reach 9 to 10 billion in 2050, unless we change current policies, it'll be worse. We will be at 2 or 2.5 planet equivalents, which is impossible and will wreck all the big ecosystems of the world, not only in 2050, 2060, but way before that. They will start collapsing one after the other. That is a huge first time in history problem, and one we have to deal with in the next few decades. The fourth shift has to do with global warming due to carbon dioxide emissions into the atmosphere. Essentially, the way we're going, we have now passed 400 parts per million. That was the level that corresponded, if we had maintained it, more or less to a 2 degrees Celsius increase, which is bad enough, but still manageable in this century. Unfortunately, the Kyoto Treaty, which was a tiny treaty, failed to stop the increase in carbon dioxide concentration. And the way we're going, having no successor to that treaty, we are joyously moving towards 600 or 700 parts per million by 2100, for instance, which would mean that in this century temperature increases could be between 4 and 5 degrees Celsius. That would make many places on Earth unlivable and would completely wreck the oceans, because not only do you have global warming coming from there, but also the acidification of the oceans, and therefore the huge damage to the life in the oceans comes with it as well. This is also a first time in history shift, and one that will bring enormous stress. Some people believe it could collapse GDPs of the world by something like 20% or more by 2050. Now, there are solutions to the problems associated with these 4 big one-time, first-time in history shifts. But I don't have time to go into the details of these solutions in this short talk. But believe me, there are technically feasible solutions to all these problems, and solving them all would probably cost no more than 5 to 7% of world GDP, which is something the world ought to be able to afford. But the big question is, are these solutions politically feasible? That's the first point. And number 2, do we have the international system, in other terms the global management system at the level of the planet, that has the capacity to effectively solve many of these problems once and for all? Now, in terms of the first point, political feasibility, the nature of the problems coming for the 4 shifts is that they will cause some people to get pitched against other people. It will pitch today's generation against tomorrow's generations. It will pitch the haves against the have-nots. It will pitch those that believe that you can only change things small step by small steps against those that think that from time to time radical rethinking is required. It will pitch those that read long articles and books and like to think for themselves against those that live off tweets and short headlines and are easily manipulable. It will pitch those that think in territorial terms against those that think more globally. In other terms, it will create many tensions in politics. I would even say it will make national politics hell in the decades to come. And politicians are likely to be at their worst. Unless, of course, and this is the first sort of plea I have for you today, is unless you reinvent national politics. That's one of the things I want you to do. And I want you to discuss, if you can, during this GIN conference. Now, why did I also say, besides the political feasibility question that we just discussed, why did I also say that the current international system's capacity to solve these problems associated with the big shifts is also in doubt? I'm saying it for a reason that I explained in my book High Noon, that some of you might have read. And if you have read it, then you know the answer. The answer is that there's a class of problems that comes with these shifts which are global problems. These are problems that cannot be solved unless all the 200 governments of the nation states that the world has work together on the solution and implement them together. And that's what the international system we have today is not good at. It isn't good at it for a simple reason that it's the nation states we have, the 200 or so nation states of the world, are almost by definition territorial. In other terms, they worry first and foremost about the interests of the people that live in their national boundaries. And the problems that need to be solved, think of fisheries depletion in the high seas, for instance, maritime pollution, space pollution even, and many other problems. Those problems are the opposite. They're not territorial problems, they're non-territorial problems. They don't know of any borderlines, and their solutions certainly have to cross borders as well. And so the system we have is not good at these things. Moreover, many of these global problems require solutions that are implemented over a century or more. Global warming, for instance, to be able to stabilize carbon dioxide concentration for the world, it would take 150 years or so of determined action by all the governments of the world working together. And that is hard to come by, that sort of long-term perspective, since nation states and their governments are populated with politicians whom, like we discussed earlier, have short-term perspectives in mind, particularly short-term electoral perspectives, since they want to be re-elected in the next 4 years or so. And thinking about solutions that take 150 years is somehow not the sort of thing they like to do. So the second challenge I have for you is that you and your contemporaries have to reinvent the current international system. That current international system isn't doing the job, and we need a better system. I described in High Noon some ideas on how we could reform it, but you probably are in a position to come up with better ideas than I could at the time. And I think that is the second big challenge for you, for your generation, is to reinvent that global management system before it's too late. And so these are my two big challenges to you. Of course, I would like you to adopt good energy usage practices, to worry about green environment and environmentally good practices in your school, in your homes, to drive to work on bicycles if you can, to worry about local poverty. I'm not saying you shouldn't do these things. On the contrary, I would like you to be leaders, local leaders in those areas. But what I've been saying today is that there's even bigger fish to fry. Besides doing these things, you have to take your generation, reinvent national politics. First of all, by making sure that you and your contemporaries are first global citizens, second national citizens, and third local citizens. Unfortunately, today we have it the other way around, and that other way around is deadly. And secondly, I want you to reinvent the global management system, because the one we have has failed us, and we're going to run into a brick wall if we keep it intact as it is and unchanged. So that was my challenge to you. I hope I have put you on the track for some big thinking, and I hope you can discuss some of these bigger points, also much more difficult points, during this conference. Good luck to you. And I hope to hear about the results of your discussions from Linda, Sils, and others. Thank you.